So this PowerPoint is going to be talking about the technology changes, and particularly in broadcasting, and how they have affected American journalism. And it's also going to look at how the the public has to news, and particularly television news, has changed over the last several decades. To a certain extent, we've already talked about this a little bit, and that is really with respect to videotape. But the major technological change for broadcasting has been in the area of television, and this is with the technology otherwise known as ENG, or electronic news gathering equipment. And this really includes videotape and, just as importantly, the video camera. Videotape, as we've talked about, really had so many more advantages over the previous medium that was used, and that was film. It's compact, it's compatible with television already, it's durable, you can use it over and over again, it's flexible, and it's cheaper, it's more cost effective. But with this actually is the importance of the ENG video camera, because it's the camera that actually puts the data, the images on the videotape, that can be used over and over again, and has very often much better quality. Previous to cameras, to ENG cameras, to video cameras, news departments used 35 millimeter film, or in some instances 16 millimeter film. The cameras that were used were made of steel. They were heavy, but they were tough. They could take a lot of damage. These were basically the kinds of cameras that made their ways through World War II and the Korean War. So they were durable. They could take it, and they were portable, meaning that you could move them, take them pretty much wherever you wanted to. But the main problem was that they were not compatible with television. Television is shot at 30 frames per second, as we have seen, whereas film is shot at 24 frames per second. So there's a synchronicity problem there. You have to have something called a time-based corrector that syncs the film up to the television frame rate. The other problem with film is that it has to be processed. Once you have the film shot, it has to be put into the soup, and it has to be developed and fixed, and then you have to actually physically cut the film to edit it. And all of these things are expensive and time consuming. So for television, what television needed was something better that was compatible for it. And that's what the ENG camera was. It still had some of the same qualities as the film cameras. They were portable, they're relatively durable, but they have much better quality images. There's no processing involved, and it's compatible with television, meaning that you can, after you've recorded something on tape, you can just take the tape out, put it in the video player, push the button, and your image is right there. But even more importantly, you could have a live capability with pretty much any ENG camera that's made. In other words, film cameras, you could not. Film was only a recording medium. ENG cameras are a live medium. You can set up your camera, hook it up to a remote truck. The remote truck sends the signal back to the TV station, and then the TV station can put that remote signal out on air live. So this is something that film cameras just didn't have. The effects of the ENG equipment are several. First, as you might expect, with no processing and compatibility with television, it made news gathering faster and more efficient. But it also really helped local news in a couple of different ways. First, you could go live. You could do what the networks did. You could have live remote shots from a parade downtown or a press conference that's happening at your local school board. This is something that was primarily something only that networks could do because they had the expensive technology that they could do that. Now with this new affordable E&G equipment, local stations could basically do the same thing. And because local stations could afford the equipment, and the equipment itself was cheaper, they could do more stories and they could do more in-depth stories. And it's really the E&G equipment that helped lead to a really explosion of investigative journalism at the local level. So next we're going to talk about um, how the access by the public has been changed really over the last 2 or 3 decades. Previously to 1980, television news was basically starting off, if you want to go back even further than that, into the 50s and 60s. A television newscast was about 15 minutes long. It was every night, but it really was maybe some film, maybe one anchor. It didn't have a whole lot of information. But then as newscasts expanded to 30 minutes, and really back in the early days of television, there wasn't a lot of local news at all. It was mostly network generated. But then in the 1960s and 70s, local television became more and more prevalent. And with that came an emphasis on news locally as well. Really, kind of as an aside, the important event here was 60 Minutes. 60 Minutes, CBS's 60 Minutes, was the first television news program that actually was profitable. In 1976, when it aired, it was the first news program at the network level to ever be in the top 10 of the ratings. And because of that, that meant that they could make money off of it. And that, of course, told the accountants at CBS that, well, if the public likes this news this news program, maybe we should have more news programs. And of course, NBC and ABC had their versions of 60 Minutes and had lots of versions of 60 Minutes. Local news began to find out that they could make money with local newscasts, and simply because of the fact that for many, it was their only local program. So newscasts became very important to local TV stations as well. But it was still a limited amount of time. Networks would have their newscast at 5:30 Central Time for half an hour. Then local stations would have a newscast at 6 o'clock to 6:30, and then local news would come on at 10 o'clock again for the evening or the later night news, which was very often a combination of network news and local news. So there was really only about an hour and a half a day of news. Perhaps some stations might have a noon show as well, but otherwise there wasn't a lot of news being generated either at the network or the local level. But then Ted Turner, a wealthy magnate in Georgia, came up with the idea of a 24-hour news cable network. He was already involved in cable programming. He had his own. He was very wealthy. He owned the Atlanta Braves baseball team in Atlanta. He had his own TV station, WTBS, that eventually became what he called the Superstation, that was on lots of cable networks around the country, TBS. He founded a second network, TNT, and then, of course, Turner Classic Movies as well. But he'd always had the idea of having a 24-hour news network, because what he wanted to do was try and combine the two elements of journalism in the different formats of print and broadcast. He wanted to be able to provide the explanation, the detail that you would find in print news, but also the immediacy of broadcast. That is, if there's an event that's going on, we can take you there immediately, but then we're going to have plenty of time to provide all the details and the explanations related to that event. Because we've got 24 hours, we've got plenty of time to do this. We're not constrained to the half-hour newscast or the 1 minute and 30-second news story. So he went about trying to put this whole thing together, and it made its debut in 1980.
Ted Turner starts CNN with very few commitments from the cable industry and really not much in the way of financing. He doesn't really have banks behind him. He doesn't have money behind him. So it's all kind of on a wing and a prayer. And frankly, it scared the crap out of the people who are working with him.
If you've got an innovative idea and the majority does not poo-poo your idea, then you must not have a very good idea. It's not enough of a breakthrough to make that kind of a difference. Didn't bother me at all. It did not bother me at all. In fact, I considered it, I said, I must really be onto something.
It was a network that was kind of like its owner, Ted Turner. It was a little ragged around the edges, but with grand global ambition.
You'll notice out in front of me that we've raised 3 flags. One, the flag of the United Nations, because we hope that the cable news network will bring a better understanding of how people from different nations live and work together.
Turner wanted to shrink the world. He wanted Americans to understand the world and not be isolationists, not be comfortable in our little cocoons.
I dedicate the news channel for America, the cable news network. You know, it was a real good plan. It was a plan to conquer the world, but with ideas, not with weapons.
Good evening, I'm David Walker.
And I'm Lois Hart. Now here's the news. President Carter...
Inside, CNN started its very first broadcast with little fanfare.
The FBI in Fort Wayne...
If Turner had it his way, it would continue from this moment till the end of time.
And even though it was a channel that was on basic cable, meaning that if you were a subscriber to cable television and you had their absolutely lowest basic channels, CNN was one of those. Despite that, there just wasn't that much attention paid to CNN. It was the only 24-hour channel out there, 24-hour news channel out there. And it didn't really make any kind of big splash until 10 years later, until 1990. In August of 1990, Saddam Hussein, the dictator of Iraq, invaded Kuwait, its neighbor, and making the claim that Kuwait, which was oil rich and very healthy financially, made the claim that Kuwait was actually historically part of Iraq, which it wasn't. The international community expressed outrage. The United Nations, under the leadership of the United States and President George H.W. Bush put together a coalition of countries, including Middle Eastern countries, that were tasked with pushing Iraq out of Kuwait. They made a deadline of January 16th, 1991, where all of the Iraqi forces needed to have withdrawn or this coalition would attack. In the meantime, U.S. forces and all these coalition forces were gathering in Saudi Arabia and other countries around the Middle East, and were preparing to attack. And of course, U.S. press was down there covering that. International press was down there, but they were also in Baghdad. CNN was one of the American networks that was in Baghdad. When January 16th came, the day of the deadline and the anticipated day of the first attacks by the coalition on Baghdad and other places in Iraq, all the other news media, pretty much all the other news media, left. There were a few AP had reporters there. There were a couple of international wire services that still had reporters there. But CNN was the only television channel to stay in Baghdad. And the main reason most of them left was because once bombing started, there wasn't going to be any way for them to get any kind of signal out of Baghdad. The Iraqis were going to shut down everything and not allow any reports from Baghdad. But what CNN had done in looking to the future of what was going to happen, they had made arrangements of having a connection between Baghdad and Amman, Jordan, basically a line which was called a four-wire, buried in the desert from Baghdad to Amman, Jordan. So even though the Iraqis would have shut down all the networks, the CNN crew that was still there would have a direct connection back to their headquarters in Atlanta and could report from Baghdad live as any sort of combat was taking place.
The skies over Baghdad have been illuminated. We're seeing bright flashes going off.
The CNN crew, holed up in a hotel in Baghdad, had direct communication with Atlanta using a special phone line called a four-wire.
Yes, he can. He can hear you.
When the bombs started dropping and Baghdad's electricity and phones went out, only CNN was reporting live.
Baghdad is back. Baghdad right now, David.
Now the sirens are sounding for the first time. The Iraqis have informed us.
They just cut the line. Get the French on the air.
We're coming by the French.
Keep it prepaid.
Well, we heard Peter Arnett saying the Iraqis have informed us, and then we didn't hear anymore. This is probably just a technical glitch.
Other markets in Asia and Europe through the night. David?
Bill Hartley reporting from the financial desk in New York. Thank you very much. I'm pleased to report that we can go back to Baghdad now and our three correspondents there. Let's see who picks up the phone.
Yes, this is Peter Arnett here. We're just temporarily off the air. There has been a lull for about 15, 20 minutes now. There has not been one tracer bullet in the sky. We don't see any more bombing in the distance, so for the time being anyway, it is quiet. I'll give you over to Bernie Shaw.
Thank you, Peter. Just to explain to our viewers why you did not hear from us for a nervously long time. For the past 20 minutes, I've been hiding under a table, and what happened was the security people made a sweep. They got very upset that there were three mortals on this floor, just three men standing in a hotel room. So I scampered to hide to make sure that if they pulled Arnett and Holloman out and took them downstairs into custody, at least there would still be one CNN person on the air. John?
I did the same thing you did, Bernie, only I hid under a bed, and it's amazing that somebody as large as I am can get under a bed that close to the ground, but I was able to do it at least, and the situation here now is, you know, the Iraqi authorities now know that we're here, and I don't know that they've been able to tell, I don't know whether their satellite dishes that are tuned to CNN work in the blackout.
of course, the effect is that everybody was tuning into CNN to see what was going on. Even other networks were quoting CNN, were attributing CNN to the conditions, the action that was taking place of the airstrikes from the coalition. And this really put CNN on the map. This made CNN the go-to 24-hour news channel that Ted Turner wanted it to be. And of course, it's going to have effects on other parts of television and television journalism and journalism generally. First, it became a legitimate competition and alternative to established broadcast news. No longer did people just have to go to ABC, CBS, and NBC. Now there was a fourth network that could provide newscasts, provide information, and most particularly provide live coverage of an important event. It was CNN that went to a presidential press conference during the day, or it was CNN that went to a shooting in a school, or some sort of newsworthy event that needed immediate coverage. It also basically, again, as networks tend to do, as all media tends to do, is that when something becomes successful, something new becomes successful, others have to do it as well. NBC partnered with or with Microsoft to put together MSNBC. The idea would be that the quick computer technology of Microsoft would be combined with the news gathering talent of NBC, and this would be a technological partnership. What it became is a news channel for NBC, and has really made its place in cable news right now. Then, of course, the third option began in October of 1996 with Fox News. Fox News was the brainchild of Roger Ailes, who is a conservative media person. He was a staunch supporter of Richard Nixon. He has been in media pretty much all of his adult life and looking for a conservative point of view. He started Fox News because he felt that all media were liberal and that the conservative voice needed to be heard. And so this is really where we are today as far as news is concerned, particularly television news. We have what's interesting is that these three news channels, all of which are cable or satellite based, have really kind of claimed specific territory in the political landscape. That is, Fox is clearly the voice of conservatives. MSNBC has become the voice of the liberal faction, and CNN has just kind of been stuck in the middle and has tried very hard to be as fact-based, fact-oriented as possible to kind of walk that middle line as much as they can and try and stay out of the political sides. Sometimes it's really hard to do that, but this is really kind of where we are as far as television news, and it's going to continue to be this way for a while. So those are really the particulars of journalism in modern times, and particularly broadcast journalism. So the last thing we'll talk about is issues and controversies related to broadcast journalism and journalism generally.